Did your family have favorites? If so, were you the favorite or someone else?
Are you ready for a shocking truth? Because what I am about to say is not just some overreaction or me being dramatic. It is years of swallowing things so small they looked invisible to anyone else, until suddenly they stacked up into something I could not ignore anymore. Every single year, my family posts a big group photo, the kind of thing people put on Facebook or print out for Christmas cards, and every single year I somehow end up cropped out, left out, or turned into the one holding the camera. At first, when I was younger, I thought it was just coincidence. Then I told myself I was being too sensitive. Later, I convinced myself that once I got older and accomplished something real, they would treat me differently, and I would finally get a seat in the frame. But here is the truth. Nothing I did mattered, because this year they did not even invite me at all. I remember the moment it hit me with full force. My brother Tyler dropped a text in the family chat about Thanksgiving weekend. The same routine as always, everyone coming together at grandma's, food, laughter, and then the big group picture outside. The replies rolled in one by one. Mom with her usual "can't wait," Dad with his thumbs up, my sister-in-law Kelsey adding some emoji-laden comment about content time. My name just sat there unacknowledged. I waited for the follow-up, the "Maya, are you coming too?" but it never came. So I finally asked Mom directly, because I did not want to assume the worst. She answered with this chirpy little message, "We thought you were traveling," with a smiley face tacked on, as if a cartoon face makes exclusion less cutting. That was the exact second I realized it was not an accident anymore. Because nobody had asked if I was traveling. Nobody had checked my plans. They just wrote me out like I was a character in a story who no longer fit their script. And the part that really burned was not just the invite itself, but the history behind it. I thought about how last year I scrolled through Facebook and saw the family picture pop up with dozens of likes and comments, calling it the perfect family shot. I was not in it. The year before, my body was half cropped out of the Instagram frame. Before that, when I was still in college, they asked me to take the picture because your camera is better, and it never even occurred to them that maybe I wanted to be in it too. So when people say, "It's just a photo," don't take it personally. I want to shake them and say, no, it is not just a photo. It is a symbol of who counts and who does not, of who gets to be part of the narrative and who gets left on the outside. I vented to my friend Jenna, who is basically the only person in my life who calls things as they are. I told her about the chat, the smiley face, the pattern, all of it. And she said something that landed so hard I swear it echoed in my brain. Silence is consent in that family. If you keep letting them erase you, they will never stop, because from their point of view, you agreed to it by staying quiet. That was when I felt something inside me click into place. Because I realized she was right. I had been telling myself to be the bigger person, to let it go, to avoid conflict. And all it did was teach them that I was safe to ignore. And here is the kicker. It is not like I have been some absent daughter who never showed up or helped anyone. Last spring, when Grandma's insurance stalled on approving the medical device she needed, I was the one who pulled out my card and covered it up front so she would not go without. At Tyler's baby shower, when my invitation mysteriously got lost in the mail, I still sent money for the crib, even though nobody even bothered to send me a thank you note. So yes, I have been present. I have contributed. I have put my family above my pride, over and over. And still, they decided to cut me out entirely this year. That night, after sitting with the anger and humiliation, I did something small but symbolic. I bought the domain with our last name, something simple that no one had claimed, and I put up a bare-bones page with one line on it. Missing someone? That was it. Just black text on white. It was not public yet, it was just sitting there, waiting. But for me it was like lighting a match and setting it on the table. I had no idea if I would strike it or not, but it felt good to hold something in my own hand for once instead of waiting for their permission. And then, just as I was shutting my laptop, an email came in. At first I thought it was spam. But no, it was real. Congratulations, Forbes 30 under 30. My heart stopped. I stared at the subject line, my mind racing. Here was the recognition I had been chasing, the kind of thing that in any other family would have been a moment of pride, something they would frame and brag about for years. And all I could think was, do I even tell them? Do I give them that? Or do I keep it to myself, just for once, and decide on my own how the story is going to be told? I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling a kind of electricity in my chest. I did not say a word to my family. I kept it to myself, because for the first time I realized the power of holding information until you decide how to use it. And let me just say, what I chose to do at that moment changed everything. Can you guess what happens next? When I woke up the next morning with that email still sitting at the top of my inbox like a dare I had given myself, I called Jenna and told her that I did not want a fight that turned into mud. That I did not want another group text where everyone pretends not to understand the question while sprinkling in fake warmth. That I wanted something clean and undeniable and impossible to scroll past. And she laughed the kind of laugh that says she already knows where this is going and said, almost as a joke but not really, that if I wanted them to see me then I should put myself somewhere they cannot pretend they did not look. And right there the sentence fell out of my mouth in one breath, across from Grandma's house. The exact spot they use every single year as a landmark for their perfect little tradition, because if the family story is going to be curated, then I am going to curate a frame of my own, and I am going to make it large enough that nobody can crop it. I pulled up 3 different local outdoor advertising vendors, and even though the prices made me swallow hard because this was not pocket change, and I am not reckless, I also knew that the money I spent on silence over the years had a total that would embarrass me if I added it up, so I told myself that I was not buying attention, I was buying clarity. And I sent 2 emails asking for availability the week of Thanksgiving and, because the universe sometimes hands you exactly the thing you can use if you are brave enough to accept it. One rep replied that a location on the main road facing Grandma's block had opened for 4 days due to a campaign shuffle, and that if I could deliver simple art with no logos and no legal landmines, they could post it the day before the holiday and keep it through the weekend. Do you know your true worth? Jenna asked again, and I realized that my answer could not be a speech about feelings. It had to be an action that taught people how to treat me. So I sketched a line on a blank canvas in a design app. Nothing flashy, no brand colors. No headshots with perfect lighting, just a recent photo of my face that any normal person would recognize and one sentence that neither begs nor brags, but states a fact that happens to be inconvenient for anyone who benefits from telling a smaller story about me, and I typed it slowly, watching each word land. Guess who made Forbes 30 under 30, which felt less like a victory lap and more like a courtroom exhibit. A piece of evidence that could sit there in the open while everyone chose how loudly to pretend they did not see it. I called the rep, confirmed the slot, sent the file, and signed the 1-page insertion order with my full legal name because I am not hiding, and when the payment screen flashed at me I paused for a long minute, thinking about my rent, my team's payroll, the conservative choices I have made for years so I would not have to call my father for a little help, and then I paid because, yes, it was a lot for 4 days of paper on metal, but the price of continuing to be erased was starting to feel like interest on a bad loan, and I was tired of financing it. Just in case the move bled into work in a way I could not control, I called a PR friend who has rescued more than one founder from their own impulses, and I told her the truth, not the polished version, and she did not scold me or talk about optics. She just asked what the cleanest version of my intention was, and I said the cleanest version is gratitude to Grandma and a refusal to be edited out of my own family. So she drafted a single paragraph that said I was honored and grateful and that I preferred to keep my private life private, and she told me to save it in my notes and not post it unless someone with real reach took the story and twisted it, because the best revenge is the one that does not need an explainer. I went back to that little domain I had purchased in the middle of the night, and I wrote a short letter to Grandma, no fireworks, just a thank you for the one time she drove 2 hours to stand in the back of a room while I demoed a beta that barely worked. And I set the site to redirect to that letter the moment the billboard went live, not because I needed the town to read it, but because I needed a private meaning behind the public image, a spine under the skin so this did not turn into a shallow stunt. Can you guess how long it took to build this? Not the file or the art or the purchase order, but the courage to put my name on something I knew would start a fire at a dinner table where I am already the subject nobody names, because the answer is years. And the strange part is that once it finally clicked, the actual steps took one afternoon, which tells you everything you need to know about how fast life moves once you stop asking for permission from people who benefit from your hesitation. Late that night, the vendor sent a proof with my face floating on a plain background and the lines sitting there like a seal on a document, and I stared at it long enough to feel both the rush and the fear because I am not stupid. I understood that there would be fallout, and that the fallout would be loud and possibly messy, but I also knew that regret is louder in the long run. So I typed the word approve and hit send, and as the confirmation email landed in my inbox, I set an alarm for sunrise. On the day before Thanksgiving, closed my laptop and sat in the quiet with one last thought that tasted like both dread and relief, which was that tomorrow these people will finally have to look up, whether they like it or not. When the sun came up on the day before Thanksgiving, I already knew the billboard had gone live because my phone started buzzing in a way it never does at 7 in the morning, and instead of messages from my family, because of course they stayed silent, I was getting texts from high school classmates I had not heard from in years, people driving past grandma's block on their way to work, attaching blurry car window photos with notes like, "Is this really you?" and "This is legendary," which gave me the strangest mix of pride and nausea because while I had planned this carefully and paid for it with my own money, I had no control over how quickly it spread or what stories people would tell once it started moving beyond my hands. By mid-morning, the small-town gossip machine had gone into full gear, and I saw posts popping up in church Facebook groups, half congratulatory and half suspicious, with comments like, "Proud of Maya for making something of herself," sitting right next to, "Attention-seeking never ends well," and even though I had told myself to stay off the feed, I scrolled anyway, and the longer I looked, the more I realized that the billboard had already become less about me personally and more about the story. Everyone wanted to tell about families, success, and who gets to claim pride versus who gets to feel embarrassed. Around noon, Kelsey, the sister-in-law who loves curating her life like an influencer highlight reel, posted a vague story about toxic people who chase clout instead of showing up for family, with no names attached but timed so perfectly after the billboard reveal that I laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. And I realized in that moment that what she feared most was not my absence, but my presence in a form she could not crop or control. Then Dad called, using the serious tone he normally reserves for talking about mortgages or medical bills, and instead of asking how I was or acknowledging the accomplishment that made the billboard possible in the first place, he went straight into a demand. "Take it down, Maya. You're embarrassing your grandmother." The silence after his words hung heavy, and when I asked if Grandma herself had called to say that, he hesitated just long enough for me to know the truth, which was that this was not about Grandma at all. It was about him wanting to manage the optics. And I told him calmly that I had signed the contract, that the billboard would stay up unless a judge told me otherwise, and that he could either be honest about his discomfort or keep pretending it was someone else's. He hung up without answering, and I sat there shaking, not from guilt, but from the raw power of finally refusing to fold. Not long after, one of my investors texted, someone who had every right to worry about public perception, and instead of scolding me, he simply asked if this was going to turn into a distraction. I sent him the prepared line my PR friend had helped me draft, just a clean statement about being honored and grateful while keeping private matters private, and his reply came back instantly, "Carry on. You earned this." That single message meant more than 100 hollow family congratulations would have, because it confirmed that outside the bubble of people who want me small, there are people who see the actual work and respect it without demanding I hide. But the family group chat I am not in still found its way to me through a cousin who has always felt uncomfortable with the way they treat me, and she forwarded screenshots of Tyler declaring that I make everything about myself, and that the billboard was proof I had lost it, which made me laugh again because if a single factual sentence on a rented piece of paper counts as losing it, then what does years of deliberate exclusion count as? The answer is nothing, because when you control the story, you also control the definitions of sanity and respectability. That afternoon, a local attorney I barely knew messaged me to say that Tyler had reached out to him asking if what I had done could be considered defamation, and the attorney, half amused, half warning, told me there was no case because I had not named a single person or accused anyone of anything, yet the fact that my brother was even looking into legal options told me how rattled they were. And I sat back and realized that I had shifted the balance without lifting a finger beyond clicking approve. Still, the pressure built in quieter ways. Friends of my parents started calling them, asking what was happening, and neighbors slowed their cars to look, and even though I had braced for backlash, I had not expected the intensity of people's need to define me, to categorize the Billboard as either heroic or pathetic, when all I had done was claim my own place in a story they had been editing for years. Late that evening, as I was finally starting to breathe again, the Billboard company itself called me, saying they had received a formal request to remove the creative. My stomach dropped, and I asked who had filed it, and the rep hesitated before admitting it was a family member. I almost laughed at the cowardice of it, because even in this moment they wanted to hide behind vague language, but I steadied my voice and told the rep that unless they had a court order, the ad stayed up exactly as contracted. The rep, professional but clearly entertained by the drama, said they would hold the line but warned me that I might be hearing more noise in the next 24 hours. I hung up, sat there in the dark, and realized that Thanksgiving dinner was less than a day away, and that I would be walking straight into the eye of a storm I had created with nothing more than one sentence on a billboard. I did not know if anyone would speak to me, if Grandma would look at me differently, or if I would be iced out completely, but what I did know, for the first time in my life, was that I had made a move they could not undo, and that the silence they had always used as their weapon was no longer mine to carry. When I pulled into Grandma's driveway on Thanksgiving morning, clutching the flowers I had bought the night before and the sealed envelope that carried the scholarship papers I had been working on for months, I already knew that the air inside that house would be heavier than usual, not because of the smell of food or the noise of family chatter, but because my billboard had turned a long-suppressed truth into something public, undeniable, and humiliating for the people who had built there. Authority on silence. I walked up to the porch without knocking too loudly, and before I even reached the door, Grandma opened it, her eyes wide not with anger but with a strange relief, as though she had been waiting for me, and the only words she managed at first were, "I did not know." Spoken softly in a way that made it clear she had spent years convincing herself that the family dynamic was normal, only to discover now that the world outside had seen the cracks she chose to ignore. Inside the kitchen, Mom fussed over the turkey and made small talk about traffic and grocery lines, pretending the elephant in the room was invisible, while Dad leaned against the counter with his arms crossed, exuding that familiar mixture of disappointment and authority, and Tyler sat at the table scrolling his phone, offering occasional smirks that felt rehearsed rather than spontaneous. I set the flowers in a vase and quietly placed the envelope on the table, not announcing it, just letting it sit there as a physical reminder that my presence today came with substance, with intention, and with something larger than the narrow roles they had assigned me over the years. For a few minutes I let the silence stretch, waiting to see if anyone would bring up the billboard directly, but predictably it was Tyler who broke first, his voice cutting through the clatter of pans as he muttered, "That was aggressive." I looked at him and answered evenly, without raising my voice, that the last 10 years of being excluded, cropped out, or dismissed were also aggressive, though disguised as jokes, oversights, or misunderstandings. And the difference between his aggression and mine was that mine told the truth while his depended on denial. Mom tried to interject, saying nobody had decided to leave me out this year, that it just happened, but I leaned forward and reminded her that pretending something just happens is itself a decision, because silence is an action. And erasure repeated enough times becomes policy. Dad cleared his throat, preparing to deliver one of his fatherly verdicts, but before he could, I slid the envelope closer to Grandma and told them what it contained. I explained that inside was documentation for a scholarship fund in Grandma's name, designed specifically for girls in our county who were first-generation college students aiming for technology or engineering, because I remembered vividly what it felt like to walk into my first computer science lecture and realize that nobody from my background was in that room, and because I also remembered the single time Grandma had driven out of her way to attend a shaky demo of my earliest project. standing in the back without saying much, but making me feel seen when nobody else did. The fund was not theoretical. The first check had already been delivered to the school, and applications were set to open in the spring. The only public condition I attached was that the scholarship would carry Grandma's name in every mention, ensuring that her legacy would be tied not to carefully staged photographs, but to opportunity made real for young women who might otherwise never have a seat at any table. The room went very still as I said the next part, which was that the scholarship would double every single time I found myself erased again, every time my absence was dressed up as logistics or oversight. Because while they had the power to exclude me from a photograph, I had the power to turn that exclusion into opportunity for people who would not forget the importance of being visible. I told them I was done begging for inclusion or arguing about whether the snubs were intentional, because the pattern spoke for itself, and I was replacing years of arguments with a system they could not outmaneuver. If they wanted to crop me out, then fine. But with every crop, another young woman would get tuition, books, or housing that my family never offered me. Mom looked at Dad with pleading eyes, Dad looked at Tyler, and Tyler stared at the envelope like it might explode. But nobody said a word, because there was nothing they could argue against without revealing their priorities in plain sight. The silence this time was not erasure but exposure, and I sat with it calmly, knowing that for once I was the one defining the terms. Grandma reached out slowly, pulled the envelope toward her, and without hesitation said she needed some fresh air. She walked toward the front door, letter in hand, and instinctively the rest of us followed, trailing her out onto the porch where the billboard loomed across the street in full view, my face staring back with the caption that had already sparked phone calls, gossip, and a dozen whispered conversations inside that house. Neighbors driving by slowed their cars, some waving, some honking, some simply staring, and I realized that Grandma was deliberately positioning herself where everyone could see her holding the envelope with her name on it. She turned to look at me, her expression unreadable, and then back at the billboard, and in that silence stretched between us all, I understood that this was the moment the story shifted from being about whether I was included in a picture to whether they could ever again pretend that the picture defined reality. I stood there without speaking, waiting to see who would break first, and the tension that clung to the air was thicker than anything I had felt at a family gathering before, because the choice had become painfully simple. Either they accepted the truth of what they had done and dealt with the consequences, or they continued their charade and watched as every exclusion doubled the reach of a scholarship that would stand in permanent contrast to their carefully arranged images. And as the cars kept passing and the whispers from neighbors carried across the yard, I knew with a certainty that whether or not I sat at that dinner table with them tonight, I had already changed the script forever. Standing on Grandma's porch with the envelope in her hand and that giant wall of text across the street doing the quiet work I needed it to do, I felt something settle inside me that had nothing to do with revenge for its own sake and everything to do with finally choosing my own frame. And when the neighbors started drifting by with those quick congratulations and the kind of curious glances people reserve for small-town news that feels bigger than the town, I realized that, for once, the room I cared about was not the living room behind me with its careful seating chart and the unspoken rule that my spot could always be repurposed, but the open air around us where people saw what was in front of them and responded without filtering it through a family committee, which made Dad shift uncomfortably and pull me aside in the tone he uses when he wants me to capitulate without a scene, asking what it would take to resolve this, as if the thing that needed resolving was the billboard, rather than the years of erasure that made the billboard necessary. And I told him, in one long breath that scared even me with how calm it sounded, that I wanted honesty more than harmony. That I wanted him to either say out loud that I did not belong or act like I did, but that I was done pretending we could keep the performance going without a price. Because the price from now on would not be my silence, but a doubled scholarship for girls who would remember exactly who made room for them. He opened his mouth and closed it again, that rare moment when the person who has always held the gavel realizes the court has adjourned without him, and when we walked back inside, Kelsey had her phone out and was filming what she called a family gratitude moment, in a voice that managed to be both bright and defensive, promising her followers that gratitude beats drama and that families stay strong when they refuse to get dragged into negativity, and although there was no name mentioned. The subtext was written in neon, yet I felt nothing but distance from it, because the story I was telling no longer required me to argue with people who market their lives like products. So I turned away, took a breath, and did what I had planned from the start, which was to flip the domain I had quietly bought from the private thank you letter into a simple public archive that did not call anyone out by name, did not reprint any ugly text messages, and did not offer a single accusation, but instead posted each annual family photo with the year and the caption as it was originally shared, followed by a link to the scholarship and a short open note that said only this: if you have ever felt erased at your own table, build another table. Leave a chair for someone else, and keep the receipts of your kindness, because you will need them when people act like they do not remember. As soon as the site propagated and the redirect kicked in, a cousin messaged me without any of the usual hedging and said that the page made her cry in a way the Billboard did not, because she recognized the backstory in the blank spaces as much as in the photos, and she told me that Grandma had already asked her to help collect letters from girls who might apply, which was the only confirmation I really wanted today. And when Mom finally came over to where I was standing and asked in a small voice whether the photo would feel different this year if I stood in it, I told her the truth, which was that I would not be posing, not because I was angry and not to punish anyone, but because I wanted to spend the afternoon at the kitchen table with Grandma drafting the first version of the scholarship announcement and answering the emails that had already started arriving, and that if the family wanted a picture, they should take it, but they should also be honest with themselves about what that picture represents, since I was no longer going to prop up a tradition that required me to disappear to stay tidy. Tyler surprised me by hovering near the doorway and, in the voice of someone who has run out of scripted lines, admitting that he had been jealous ever since I left and built a life that did not require approval, which made me take a beat before I replied. Because it would have been so easy to throw his jealousy back at him as an excuse for everything he had done, but the truth is that jealousy is part of this in families that keep score instead of keeping faith, so I told him that I had built my own net because none was offered, that I was tired of performing gratitude for scraps, and that he did not have to understand my choices, but he needed to understand that I would keep making them whether he approved or not. And the strangest thing happened where he nodded, not in surrender but in recognition, and backed away without another performative jab, which I took as a small win in a day that was already bigger than wins and losses. Dinner happened in that stilted way where everyone uses the correct words while the real conversation hums under the table, and when they assembled for the annual photograph, I stayed in the kitchen, not hiding but choosing, and poured Grandma a glass of water while she unfolded the scholarship letter and asked me to read it out loud so she could hear how her name would sound in the world, and I did, slowly, and when we finished she pressed the paper flat with her palm and said that, for the first time in years, she felt like the family was doing something real instead of pretending it's something pretty, which was the kindest and most cutting thing I have ever heard her say. That night, after I drove home through streets that still held the daytime gossip like heat after sundown, I checked the domain again and saw that the scholarship page had started to gather small donations from people I barely knew. Neighbors who had seen the billboard and decided that their part in this story was not to choose a side in a family argument, but to send a few dollars toward a girl who would not have to ask permission to sit in any frame, and I sat very still and let that be enough. Because the point was not to convert my parents or to shame my brother or to win a comment war. The point was to take the energy that exclusion had been stealing from me for years and pump it into something that would outlive a holiday. I did not win because I humiliated anyone, and I did not win because a magazine put me on a list. I won because I finally picked me in public and built a structure around that choice that rewards truth instead of noise. And while I cannot tell you if the family will ever invite me again with sincerity, or if they will keep chasing a version of us that looks better on paper, I can tell you that I will not be waiting on their answer to move. That the scholarship will double without ceremony if they crop me again. That my company will continue whether or not anyone at that table claps for me, and that Grandma, whose name now sits on a page that turns invisibility into tuition and books, will get every update first. Because she is the one I wanted to see me, and she did.